Medicine has had an influx of females, and it is well known that women on average tend towards agreeableness and being less direct. How much of the catastrophic and authoritative COVID response was due to a wave of toxic femininity in medicine? Do you think it's an accident that medicine has become more algorithmic and protocol-driven? How much incompetence is hiding behind standard of care? There's so much there.
Yeah.
That's like 8 different huge questions all in one. I think that the now majority of women in most health specialties, big exceptions being sports medicine and surgery. There are a few other exceptions, I think, but the big exceptions are that surgeons are still and probably always going to remain predominantly male discipline, and sports medicine is predominantly male. But that made it easier for all of the other things that happened during COVID to happen. Yes, more agreeable. Yes, my language that I've written about that you don't use here, but you allude to the same thing, is that the female ways of interacting over conflict being much more likely to be covert rather than overt. I would never have said, I can't imagine that anyone would advocate for passive aggression.
Yeah.
But the idea that men need to not do things in the male ways, which is to say, out in the open, direct, a confrontation that happens, and maybe people who have to observe it don't feel really great about it, but then when it's over, and everyone knows it's over, and everyone knows what happened, and there are witnesses to it, which is one huge advantage of the male typical way of dealing with disagreement to the female typical way. The female typical way being covert, meaning that afterwards there are as many people who have opinions about what happened and what it meant as there are people who have opinions, and there is basically no way to assess who is right. So yes, how much of the catastrophic and authoritative COVID response was due to a wave of toxic femininity in medicine? I don't know if due to is the right language there, but certainly made possible by, facilitated by, and maybe wouldn't have been possible or would have been thwarted much more effectively had there still been a culture of, actually, we're going to deal with that right now. We're going to have a confrontation about our disagreement right now, because you know what? Lives are at stake. Absent the female rise.
I agree with that. My instinct is it went down differently than it would have, but it would have gone down either way.
Yeah.
I want to focus in, though, on the standard of care issue, because I believe that this actually tells us something about the preconditions and how they interacted with COVID. What happened to medicine is largely the result of what happened in the prior era, where medicine was driven by the risk of litigation. So you had a world in which malpractice was commonly alleged and commonly fought over in court. That problem got solved through mechanisms like HMOs, which standardized care, protected doctors from litigation. In other words, they limited your rights quite a bit. But the other thing that happened was that standard of care became the mechanism that immunized doctors from being accused of malpractice. Mm-hmm. So the experts, see earlier point regarding experts being a bunch of dumb fucks, but the experts decided what the right thing to do was for a patient that manifested with, some checklist of symptoms. That was the standard of care. Mm-hmm. And the point is, if you did, as a doctor, what the standard of care said you were supposed to do in the situation, you were immune to being sued, irrespective of how bad it was for your patient, irrespective of outcome, because the point is, well, we did for him exactly what you would do for somebody in his circumstances. The fact that it didn't go well is because, who's to say? And if you departed from the standard of care, even worse, let's suppose you were a good doctor and you gave your patient advice that was in their interest, and it violated the standard of care, and it went badly. Suppose you gave them the advice that 2/3 of the time would have saved their life, but 1/3 of the time it cost them their life. That's a good deal if they had a sufficiently severe diagnosis. But now you're going to be sued. And in the court case, well, the doctor violated the standard of care. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. Well, I do think that there's an angle here with regard to COVID.
Sorry for the interruption. This clip is from our latest private Q&A for our DarkHorse Locals community. If you haven't yet, join today for only $7 a month to participate in Q&A streams like this one with me, Dr. Bret Weinstein, and Dr. Heather Hying. Q&As are held at least twice monthly. DarkHorse Locals also offers exclusive access to the watch party that happens during our weekly live streams. Sign up at darkhorse.locals.com for just $7 a month. We have been demonetized, censored, and slandered countless times over the last 5 years. Your support is what enables us to keep the lights on and the show running. Thank you for joining us over on darkhorse.locals.com.
COVID may have actually revealed one of the huge problems with standard of care and the greater algorithms and protocols and such, precisely because it's a novel pathogen. And so many doctors don't have diagnostic skills at all. It wasn't even part of their training. It was never part of the expectation. They needed to know medical codes and how to read, how to look things up and figure out what the right thing to do is in this case. Well, what do you do when there's a novel pathogen? And so I remember in the early days, we've talked about recently, the medical literature, the scientific and medical literature was just overflowing with all these people trying to figure it out. And the gatekeepers couldn't stop it at first. But in the actual practice, there were also a few YouTube channels, I remember, with doctors saying, well, hold up, what's with the ventilators? Like, the ventilators are killing people.
Yep.
And those people were censored, as I remember it. And it occurred to us at the time, like, well, how did we arrive at ventilators so quickly? Like, how did that become effectively, and I don't think the language was used, but how did anything become standard of care for a pathogen that just showed up on the scene like minutes ago? So, like, how do standards of care become established? And how dangerous is it to have an entire set of medical professionals who only know how to act when given a booklet that tells them how to do so, as opposed to you've got a patient in front of you and they are manifesting with these symptoms. Help them. You're a doctor. Help them. Do not go to a book. This is not the time for a book. You are trained as a doctor. Figure out how to help this human being in front of you.
So this is the direction I was hoping to go. The claim I made is that public health staged a coup against medicine. Medicine is exactly the process that you're talking about, where you have some novel phenomenon. Doctors see the symptoms. They use the things that those symptoms suggest might be relevant. They discover the pattern of what works and what doesn't. And collectively, they come up with some protocol for dealing with this new phenomenon. Mm-hmm. That protocol might reasonably become a standard of care.
Right.
But the idea that there's a standard of care, it's like the oracle on the mountain that tells the truth. Mm-hmm. And in this case, nobody knew the truth. So public health used the fact that standard of care is treated as the truth from on high in order to override medicine in its discovery process of the correct protocol. And indeed, many doctors did come up with a protocol that worked. Yep. And they were derided, lost their licenses, etc.
Yep.
So point is, standard of care is like so many of these different properties. Peer review is not review by peers, right? Standard of care, who is going to assail the standard of care? Right? You've got different kinds of care, and then you've got something that sets the standards, the best care, right? Yeah. Well, that's what it's supposed to be. But in this case, what it is the mechanism for synchronizing the behavior of doctors, which should not be happening at the beginning of a novel health emergency because nobody knows what to do. Mm-hmm. So the discovery process was displaced by a protocol for whatever reason. Why did they want people on ventilators? Where did that come from? Well, in part, it came from the priming of doctors. What really happened in COVID is we knew COVID was coming before we knew it had arrived. And doctors were shown lots of video, much of which we now know is fraudulent, from the Chinese.
Yeah.
who were showing a debilitating pandemic that was literally killing people in the streets. People were falling over suddenly dead, right? And these doctors thought that they were going to be jeopardized by treating this. They found their courage to treat it. And then they were told, here's what you do. You see a patient with this, you stick them on a ventilator, right? And so the point is the pump was primed while we now know the virus was actually already circulating. It wasn't serious enough to have gotten their attention before it had a name. And so anyway, having been told a wave of something is coming, people will be dying in the streets, the morgues will be overwhelmed, we have to flatten the curve because the hospitals will be overwhelmed, we're going to clear them of everybody else. All of that bullshit caused doctors to feel like, okay, what do we do? Standard of care. Here's what happens. Here's the checklist. Here's the person who goes on the ventilator. And what did it do? It created a wave of death that could then be pointed at as an indicator that COVID was this deadly disease we had been told it was, which was then used to shove a whole bunch of other draconian bullshit down our throats. And that story is a story of the displacement of normal medicine by standards of care written not by doctors, but by public health professionals who either were incompetent or had their reasons that they've never shared.
Yeah, I guess this makes me wonder when malpractice insurance became a thing that every doctor has to have, and what that actual history looks like. Obviously, patients having the ability to hold doctors accountable for actual errors has value.
Yep.
But the conformity that it creates, at least in the version of history that we've lived, where malpractice insurance keeps every doctor tied and tethered and scared, has in part and maybe in large part resulted in a huge denigration of the quality of medical care. So, what world is possible in which bad doctors or doctors who were under pressure to make a bad decision can be held accountable, but the rest of the effects of the malpractice insurance that everyone is forced to have are disappeared? Like, can we get to a spot like that?
Well, it's a bit like the universities, right?
Yeah, it's very much like the universities. Yeah.
Could you have an institution that worked like a university? Yeah. But you don't have the people to staff it because the universities have been making people dumb for so long. So, no. Yeah. So the problem is the entirety of what these people learned in medical school is wrong because it's non-Darwinian and because it doesn't understand that they are intervening in complex systems. Okay,
but I'm asking a different question. Yes, you're right. Over in university space, I have a much more of a sense of both what went wrong, when things went wrong, how you could build a system that could prevent similar things from going wrong, not perfectly, in the future, and the biggest barrier. The absolute biggest barrier that I can't see a way to solve is, it's going to be 40 years before you have, maybe not 40. It's going to be a long time before you have people to staff those universities with the faculty that you need. Over in medicine space, you've got the same staffing problem for sure. I am curious about the piece of the administration of medicine that I don't know anything about. Whereas I know about the administration of higher ed. I have a sense of both the history and like all of that, and what could be done. And I'm curious about. And you're going to say, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm actually just curious about what a functional system would look like, understanding that you still have the biggest problem remaining.
Right, but I'm not trying to draw a one-to-one with the staffing problem. Yes, you have the staffing problem, but the toolkit doesn't exist. Okay.
Yes,
so hold on. So if you were to take away from doctors the pharmacological toolkit of things that have not been demonstrated to be safe, most doctors would be no different than the janitors cleaning the hallways. So the point is they've got tools. There's no rescuing a system that has a bunch of dangerous tools and a bunch of people who think that they know what those tools are going to do, and they couldn't possibly.
Yeah.
So the point is, you would need to build a system that worked on an upgraded Hippocratic oath, where the point is, first do no harm should probably say something about intervene as a last resort,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, I guess also, and I see intimations of this in the chat, as we've talked about before. I'm thinking entirely within the allopathic system,
Yeah.
and there are a lot of other systems out there, and these, osteopaths and naturopaths and homeopaths and Chinese medical healers of various stripes and all this, Indian, Ayurvedic. Many of them are doing interesting, powerful, excellent work outside of the gatekeeping of
Yep.
allopathic medicine, and also some of them have drawn the attention of allopathic medicine and are being also shut down.
Yep.
So, there are these threads being kept alive, actually more hopefully than what I see in higher ed.
Yeah. So if I can just, my final point was going to be, our system was overrun by malpractice claims because our system was hell-bent on malpractice.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
And the point is that did not have to be. That's an epistemological problem that, we all know the stories where somebody who didn't have a right to sue did sue.
Right.
And won.
Yep.
And that's frightening. You wouldn't want to be a doctor faced with some, angry patient who didn't realize, that the thing that they were being treated for was mostly hopeless and that you actually did the right thing for him. And, that's frightening. But in general, the number of people that doctors are maiming and killing is through the roof.
Yeah.
And so the idea that they've solved their malpractice problem means they've reduced the amount that goes into court battles. It doesn't mean that they've done anything about malpractice, which is utterly rampant.
Yeah.